Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be, to this final episode of our six-part series where I have the pleasure of interviewing David Shapiro, the futurist, technologist, and author of The Great Decoupling, a book that captures the new economic concept called post-labor economics. And in this series of episodes, we unpacked the whole book part by part. There are six parts in the book, and in today's session, we are thrilled to welcome David back to unpack the final part six, called Life After Labor. Right? Now, before we go into part six, Life After Labor, the topic of today's call, today's webcast, I'd like us to go just provide a general orientation of what post-labor economics is and why is it so relevant for us at this time. So, David, thank you very much for your time. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, high level recap of post-labor economics. Over the last few decades, we've seen a meteoric rise in automation, and artificial intelligence and humanoid robots are just the next wave of that. So, if you look at the trends and you look at the data, in the long run, the demand for human labor is falling off, and that fall off is accelerating. The logical conclusion is that we're entering into a phase of post-labor. So, what does this mean? This means that productivity is decoupled from human labor inputs. We don't have an economic model for this because that has never existed. So, therefore, we're working on building an economic model for that. And that is the core essence of post-labor economics. And one of the core problems that is created by this is right now, the whole economy is predicated on the wage labor social contract. The idea that the economy needs human input. So the fundamental assumption is there's always going to be jobs, and that's one of the primary ways to put money into households and individuals. And then, of course, that drives consumer demand, and consumer demand drives the economy. Well, if the labor component breaks, then household income breaks and aggregate consumer demand breaks and everything else breaks. So
Exactly.
you end up with this domino effect. Now, of course, this is all still hypothetical. It has not happened yet, but as we've explored in this series, the data is very compelling, and there's also even more problems beyond that, which is if you don't have labor, then you don't have political leverage, and also if you don't have labor, you might not have anything to do. So then we're going to talk today about how does the civic engagement work afterwards, and what do you do with your time and all that extra time, and where do we even get the idea of how do you live after labor? So that's what we're covering today.
Exactly. So, in the previous episodes, we went into all of those details. And if you'd like to view those episodes, they're all available on both David's Post Labor Economics YouTube channel and also on Tectonic Conversations YouTube channel. So, I was really looking forward for this because this is where it all comes together. And people are often talking about, oh my God, if this really happens and if everything gets automated and if we no longer need to work, where are we going to find meaning and purpose? So this is going to be that conversation. So, um, in your book, you write about life after labor, not necessarily as a utopian, magical kingdom, but rather as a practical next design stage for our civilization as we simply progress along our socio-evolutionary curve. And I'd like you to sort of set us up with the beginning of that chapter where you, I think, identified something really seriously important and true,
Yeah.
the great burnout. Let's start there.
Yeah, so the primary thing is when people talk about, well, I don't want to lose my job, and what people really don't want to lose is their sense of livelihood, their sense of security. But when you look at the objective data out there, we're already burned out. Everyone is disconnected. When you look at the numbers, it's in some countries it's as low as 10% of employees are engaged. The global average is 20 to 30% are engaged. And that means everyone else is some level of disengaged to actively burned out and checked out. And whether or not top line unemployment statistics are showing that, oh, there's not a collapse of labor yet or labor force participation rates. Doesn't matter. People don't want to work. So, the kind of the meme that has gone around is, nobody wants to work anymore. Well, that's actually true. Is the vast majority of people don't want to work. And so what that tells me is that culturally, we are ready for a change. We're ready for something to come in and change the equilibrium, the status quo, whatever it happens to be. And that's not to say that post-labor economics is inevitable, but when you look at the rise of automation and AI and robotics, I do think that it is at least partly inevitable. What is not inevitable is how good it could be for people. And this is why, as you pointed out, I don't frame it as automatically utopian. I also don't frame it as automatically dystopian. It's not necessarily catastrophic, but it's an opportunity for a tremendous amount of change. So during the pandemic time, we had the Great Resignation, right, where a lot of people quit their jobs. Now, of course, there's been the rehiring, and then there's of course been a huge backlash in some business circles and finance circles where they say, employees are too entitled again. We need to show them that we can make their life painful. Kind of hearkening back to Alan Greenspan, and there's more economists today kind of picking up that kind of thing where there's this sense of almost entitlement where it's like, we need to put the employees back in their place. Well, that's really not going to pan out well in terms of social stability and happiness and having this kind of like love-hate relationship, and it's mostly hate relationship between employees and employers. And I've kind of likened it as it's time for a divorce. We're ready for a divorce, and what we're really negotiating right now is we're negotiating the exit. What does alimony look like? Right. And so some people say, oh, well, the capitalists owe us universal basic income because of how much we've been exploited. And I don't fully agree with that. I understand the sentiment.
Yeah.
We want to get a divorce because the capitalists and the businesses, they're gung ho on automation and robotics and automation. Why? Because it's better, faster, cheaper, and safer than humans. No one can blame them. The market demands that they increase efficiency, and eventually, the best way to increase efficiency is to fire your people. Likewise, a lot of people are burned out because they're tired of being cogs in a machine. So, but then what we're stuck at, that great reevaluation is just like anyone who's been through a divorce, is it's really hard to imagine the freedom after because
Yeah.
you're stuck with the devil that you know, and you're like, but I don't want to give up on this. I want to make it work. I'm afraid of this change. But everyone's going to be happier after the divorce is settled. But the divorce is messy, and that's where we're at right now. We know the divorce is coming, and we don't want to deal with it yet. So that's what the world, in my view, that's what the world is holding its breath
Yeah.
for,
I think
is
that
we don't want to call the lawyer yet.
I think you and I and people who follow this conversation know that divorce is coming.
Right,
Majority has the like discomfort of like pre-divorce discomfort, as in, I'm not sure if this is going to work out. I think
right.
that's a stage, and there are symptoms of that you've identified. Tang ping, for example, the laying
Hmm.
flat or bed rotting. What is that?
Yeah. So historically, first I need to provide some context. Historically speaking, these kinds of seismic shifts in economic paradigms hit the younger people first. There's a lot of reasons for this. They don't have as much experience, they don't have as much savings, those sorts of things. They're not as secure in their careers. So, for instance, during the second industrial revolution, when farms were being mechanized, they young people started leaving the farms because there wasn't anything for them to do. Instead of taking over the farm, their fathers and grandfathers and uncles now had tractors and now had other things. And we actually still see that trend today, where the average age of farming is like, what is it? I think 63. Like farmers are still getting older and older because of all the mechanization and automation. Well, that leaves less and less for young people to do. So that's one of the primary patterns that you see. So yeah, so that's the historical context. So what we're seeing is we're seeing huge amounts of young people that are, I think it's something like up to 89% of new grads are not finding a job in their preferred field within a year of graduating now. So that's a sign. And so then you have Tangping, which is a Chinese movement called lying flat, where they're just checked out of the economy. because China has the 996, which is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And guess what? There's the Chinese dream has already died on the vine. So they're saying, I'm not going to work this hard. I'm not going to get anything for it. So I might as well just check out of the economy. And there's an equivalent movement in the West, in America and Europe, called bed rotting, which is just staying in your bed all day. And so Gen Z, the young people, are starting these popular revolts against work culture, and it's pretty much a global phenomenon. Now,
Mm.
of course, you might say, "Oh, but the top line statistics show that young people are making more money than they ever have," and okay, yes, depending on how you look at the statistics. But then, there, what is it? There's statistics, and or there's lies, there's damned lies, and then there's statistics. So another statistic is that the average age of first home purchase is continuing to go up.
Yep.
So whatever you think is happening with income levels, because the nominal income levels are still going up, but the nominal wealth levels are not. And one of the primary life milestones is how old are you when you buy your first home? That's continuing to go up everywhere.
Yeah.
So those are some of the factors that are contributing to this really, really deep amount of being burned out and checked out, particularly in young people. And I'm focusing on that because that's the canary in the coal mine. Because if you're older, if you're more established in your career, you have more savings, you have more investments, you're more insulated from these kinds of things. But this is why youth revolts and youth riots tend to kind of happen first. We saw that in France during the Great Recession.
Yep.
And we saw it with the Arab Spring a few years later, where it was not entirely young people, but certainly the amount of energy
Mostly
that
driven. Yeah.
happened.
It was mostly
Yeah,
driven by young people.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it
Disenfranchised. Yeah.
driven by Twitter. And we
Yeah.
just saw what was it? I think it was Nepal. It was Nepal or Tibet. Just had a youth revolt, and it was organized on Discord, which is an internet platform.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're seeing the warning signs, and that's the canary in the coal mine that's
Yeah.
happening.
And what is important to say is that this is really not laziness. This is really a symptom of a collapsing social contract that
Yep.
really, and this was the social contract that equated human worth with paid work. That
Yep.
is being now challenged directly. And automation, if anything, just puts a spotlight on this absurdity that while machine can outperform us, what do we do? What do we do?
Right.
Where do we find the purpose for existence? Um,
Hmm.
so I think the problem statement is very clear, and thank you for articulating it so eloquently. So now, um, what we really are saying is that for the last while we've been all operating in this like a survival economy, and we ought to be now thinking what is a different kind of economy that is upon us after automation.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what do you mean by that and that meaning in sentimental economy?
Right. So let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, that we get the divorce and we get the alimony. So then what do you do? What do you do with all that free time? When you look at it from a numbers perspective, what you come up with is that the remaining scarce resource is going to be people's time. Because just imagine that you get all of your wishes met and you have enough passive income that you don't need to work, that you're not worried about money. So that's a survival mode where you work if you don't work, you don't eat and you get thrown out of your house. Imagine that goes away. So then it's like, well, there's no work to be done for most people in this future. And when I say in this future, it could be 5 years away, it could be 10 years away, could be 20 years away, probably not 20 years away. It's probably happening sooner than that. That's not to say that all jobs will be gone within 20 years, but a big chunk of jobs are going to be long gone
Yeah.
within 20 years. So the concession that we're making here is okay, just imagine that you go through this where you have passive income, that's the dream of retirement. So then what do you do? Well, the primary resource that you still have to allocate is time. So the question then becomes, where do you allocate your time? And so then you say, okay, well, how do you make that choice? If you're not trying to allocate your time in a way to maximize return on investment or return on work or income, then what you're really going to be doing is allocating your time to optimize how much meaning you're getting out of your life. And there's all kinds of frameworks that we can use to understand this. Some that have been very well studied, both just psychologically, but also in the business world. One framework is self-determination theory, which
Yep.
says that there's three primary psychological motivations, which is competence, which is your ability to move through the world successfully. Then there is autonomy, which is the ability to make choices, your freedom of choice, your level of agency. And then there's relatedness, which is the quantity and quality and supportiveness of your relationships. Those are, regardless of money, those are things that people want. Now, the point, though, is that money and work right now are often equated with both competence and autonomy because the more money you have, the more freedom you have. And the more money you have, the better you're able to navigate life and sustain the ups and downs of life. That's what the competence level is of mastery, of your skillfulness and your ability to survive in the world. So, moving beyond that, it's like, okay, well, what if that's taken care of? So then what we've really been kind of deprioritizing as a culture is that relatedness. We're in a loneliness epidemic. So one of the key things that you could anticipate based on this, SDT is very, very well studied and well established in the literature. What you would expect is, okay, well, under survival economics, you're putting all of your time into that safeguarding autonomy and competence via work. So then we're going to really invest in relatedness because why? We have a loneliness epidemic. People are not marrying. People are not having children. People don't have friends. People aren't dating. Like there's all kinds of these dysfunctions in society. If you were to if aliens were to show up tomorrow and give us a health report card, they'd be like, wow, you're really sick. You're a social species that doesn't spend time with each other. Something has gone terribly wrong. So that's
Oh,
one of the very first things that I would anticipate is going to start to change uh, un, uh, during post-labor economics is okay, we really need to rehabilitate our relatedness. So that's one of the frameworks. Another framework is what is called Therapeutic Lifestyle Changes, TLCs, by another psychologist, or was he a psychiatrist? Dr. Roger Walsh. So this is a framework of 8 objective behaviors that if you do these 8 behaviors, you will be happier and healthier. It's very plain and simple. I have a hard time remembering all off the top of my head, but it's, time in nature, diet, exercise, charity and giving back, spirituality, those sorts of things, rest and relaxation, having hobbies and, spending time with loved ones. I think I got 7 out of the 8. I'm missing one of them. But you do all of those behaviors on if not a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis. Guess what? Things like anxiety and depression tend to go away. And if you were to say, hey, what is the optimal way for a human to live, and you make that checklist, then yeah, and it's very well known. If you eat right, you'll feel better. If you get good sleep, you'll feel better. And all of those things are things that are currently being deprioritized again because we're being squeezed harder and harder by the need to make money, and people are getting more and more frantic. There's the grind set, there's hustle culture, and all these other ideas that it's like just work harder, but you're working harder at the expense of taking care of your
everything.
body and your life and your mind. So that's what the transition from the survival economy to the meaning economy is, which is where are you actually going to allocate your time and energy if not towards work? So then there's a whole bunch of other things that you can do with that extra time and energy that you get back.
And I often, when I speak about this with my friends and colleagues at work and others, people really have a hard time thinking about, oh my God, what am I going to do? Right. So
Right.
I love that you're actually introducing these frameworks, which is completely logical. Actually, when you stop and think about it, it
Hmm.
is like if you have autonomy in your life, if you feel you have competence in what you like doing, if you have security so that you're stable and secure, relatedness that combines truly that could be fully enriched life. And I
Yep.
love how I listened to, I don't know who it was, I think it was Mo Godat, who answered the question, what are we going to do after work? Live. We're going to live, love, create. So here
Yep.
is here is a mental exercise that I would encourage everyone who is currently working full time and cannot imagine what it would be like without that work. Ask yourself this question: what would you do if you suddenly have a 2 week paid vacation, but you're staying at home? Okay, what would you do for 2 weeks if you didn't have to go to work at all? You're at home, you're healthy, and you're getting paid. answer that question. Now imagine
Yep.
what would you do if that vacation now was 3 months long? Would you
And it was all of your friends had the same vacation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Would you pick up a new hobby? Would you meet your friends more often? Would you go and visit your, aging aunt that you haven't seen for 10 years? What would you do if that vacation was now 2 years long? Do that mental exercise. It's very helpful, actually. Now,
Yep.
so Dave, you have painted, I think, a very compelling picture and introduced us to these frameworks that exist on how to actually lead a successful and fulfilled, meaningful life. Compensation still remains a question. Now, we did talk about it in previous episodes, but maybe what we do is just very briefly remind our audiences on how do we think that will be solved? What is that
Right.
pyramid of prosperity?
Yeah. So, quick recap. One of the kind of the in the post-labor economics framework is the key problem, right? The keystone problem is how do you get money into households? Right now, wages are the primary way. People who own capital, whether it's rental properties or businesses or stocks or whatever, they'll be fine, right? Own more, you get passive income. But for 60 to 80% of people, uh, labor is the only way of getting income. So you need to replace that to get money into households to keep the economy chugging along. You can do something like UBI. We've talked about that quite extensively, and there's a couple ways that you can fund UBI. You can just print money and give it to people. That's helicopter money. What I want to caution though is there are some people that are adherents to MMT, modern monetary theory, which is it's a little misleading because it's neither modern and it's not a particularly well supported theory. But one of the things that that theory says is that you can just print your way out of any issue, which is not true. That has historically not panned out well. And also, modern monetary theory is not widely accepted and has not been popular for a long time. So, just printing money and giving it to people is something that, one, even if you wanted to do that, only a few people can. You have to be a sovereign nation that has the ability to mint currency.
Of course.
So, United States could do that, but not every city can do that. Not every state can do that, and not every nation can do that. Most nations in Europe are a member of the European Union, so they can't mint their own money.
Correct.
Um, England could because they have the pound sterling separate and they left the EU. But the point is that's not a solution for every locality. What you can also do then is tax. You can tax and redistribute. And you say, well, who do you tax? Is it a wealth tax? Is it a land value tax? Is it do you tax billionaires? Do you tax AI and robots? It could be all of the above. But the idea is that you fund UBI through a tax. And what that does is it takes money from the people who have a lot of money and gives it to households to ensure that the churn of the economy keeps going, that aggregate consumer demand stays up. Now, one thing is that people are like, well, is that fair? It's like, well, if you want customers that have money, you need to make sure that your customers have money. Otherwise, they're going to stop buying stuff from you. If they can't afford the goods and services, then the economy collapses anyways. Now, I'll leave it to politicians to figure out exactly who to tax and how much and when and all that other fun stuff. But in principle, there you got UBI. So that's like tier one is the universals. Tier two is going to be stuff like sovereign wealth funds. So this is different from a UBI in that your nation or your state or your city has resources that are valuable. Now, that could be oil, it can be solar, it can be spectrum, it can also just be wealth funds, like an endowment program. And
Yeah.
the idea is that they have revenue producing assets. And then those revenue producing assets can be distributed directly to households. There's the prime example in the world is the Alaska Permanent Fund. So the Alaska Permanent Fund takes oil revenues and just gives it to households.
Yep.
So that ensures that Alaskan citizens, it's only about $1,700 a year with some variance, but it's been going for decades, and so it's a proof positive that you can have something as large as a state and that has a resource. And of course, they're not the only one with wealth funds. There's plenty of other nations that have gigantic wealth funds. They
By the
often do
way,
not pay citizens directly, though. Often, sovereign wealth funds are used to fund the government. So then people are still getting some of the benefits, they're getting some of the services for cheaper. Now, I would make the argument that it's probably better to give the money to citizens so that they can spend it appropriately and let the market figure out where that's best spent, because governments are famously not efficient at
Inefficient.
producing goods and services. Right.
Yeah.
Let the free market sort it out. Again, I'm not here to make an argument one way or another. Both of those options exist. So that's tier two. Tier three is collective private wealth. So this is things like employee stock owned or employee owned enterprises, cooperatives, trusts, those sorts of things. One of the reasons that this is going to become super viable, I think, in the future is the concept of the decentralized autonomous organization, which this is where you use blockchain-based technology in conjunction with artificial intelligence to create self-running companies. And these self-running companies, because guess what? If AI is smart enough to replace everyone, it's going to be smart enough to run a company.
Of
So
course.
then you just have a local decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, that might run a farm or a data center or a solar farm or whatever else have you. It's going to run that, and then as a stakeholder in that, you then have the ability to just earn passive income. And now there's a question that I have to preempt here, and that is, well, if you don't have any wealth to start with, how do you buy in? And that's a really great question. There are other things that governments can do, such as tax credits, negative income taxes, and dollar matching schemes to say for every dollar, just as an example, the dollar matching scheme, for every dollar you invest in a qualified investment vehicle, whether it's an index fund or a DAO or whatever else have you, we will match that, at the end of the year. One of my first companies had and many companies do for full-time employees, have dollar matching schemes for your retirement account. So for every dollar you invest, they will match that. So it's basically free money.
Yep.
There's no reason that cities, states, and governments can't do the same thing for those private investments, especially if they are well-run collective resources.
And
And
you
so
can
what you
start,
do is,
and yes, and everybody can start and must start with the disciplined way of thinking and spending the money that they currently bring into their households.
sure, exactly.
Reserving a small percent from every check for
Yep.
this future that's coming, right?
Yep. Yep. And plenty of governments around the world are exploring ways of making it automatic.
Hmm.
There's the baby bonds idea, which is becoming more popular. The idea that the government will just buy an index fund of $1,000 or however much for every baby that's born, make it as automatic as possible. Again, people can argue whether or not that's ethical or how do you fund it or that sort of thing. I'm just pointing out that's an idea.
Yep.
And we can come up with more ideas like that. So that was tier three. Tier four is conventional property. So this is old school. Nothing changes here. That's your rental properties. This is your businesses. This is your stocks and bonds, whatever else you want to have. But again, instead of just letting people, assuming that people will invest wisely, you make it the default policy. You incentivize that behavior with negative income taxes and that sort of thing. And then finally, tier five, kind of the cherry on top, is any residual wages that are still going to be around. Because even when AI and robots are better, faster, cheaper, and safer than all humans at all tasks, there's still going to be a demand for some humans in some places. You're still going to want to go to, see comedians and musicians and, hopefully YouTubers, although I'm not counting on it. But there's still going to be some demand for human connection, right? You go to get a massage, you might want it to be a human. You go to the coffee shop, you might want it to be a human. If you own a fence company, like I'm getting a new fence put in at my new house, you see I'm about to move. Whoever owns that fence company, he's going to get paid, even if he has robots putting in the fence for him. So there will be some leftover wages, but it's not going to be the majority of everything. So those five tiers of new income is what we're anticipating will be the way that everyone makes their makes
That's
makes
yeah.
ends meet in the future.
That's how the meaning economy is funded.
Right.
And what you said, I love what you said. The meaning economy is actually, it's the meaning in a sense that I am finding my meaning
Yep.
and I'm organizing my own life around that. So, what you describe at the very top of the pyramid, this residual labor, those are the humans that will be available to us as consumers to help us expand and contextualize and improve the meaning of our lives,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So that's
Absolutely.
that's the connection. Very, very good. So now, what might the life in the cities look like after all this is in place, David? Can we talk a little bit about that civic renaissance and agency that we think is going to unfold here?
Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, all right, just for the sake of argument, let's assume that this works out and people have a whole lot more free time on their hands. Are they going to spend all that time on the internet and playing video games? Some people will, sure. But we have plenty of historical examples as well as contemporary examples. People often get more politically engaged.
Mhm.
So, in the time of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, what did wealthy citizens do with their free time? They participated in politics.
Yeah.
What do seniors do who are retired? They vote in mass, right? So, political engagement really goes up. And you
Yeah.
might say, well, okay, that's just going to get messy. People are going to be arguing more. But that's not necessarily how it turns out. If you go to Twitter, then yes, then people are just going to be arguing and yelling at each other, and that's not going to be particularly productive. However, remember that civic engagement happens at multiple levels. There's your local level, there's your state or provincial level, and then there's the national level. And that's just the three that most people can vote in. Then, of course, there's supranational, which is international agencies and efforts. Many people will become more politically engaged, which actually has a net positive. It's a set of intangible and more indirect economic benefits, which is better governance. That means they have more time to spend on, with the accountability and transparency that artificial intelligence and blockchain and other technologies will enable, which is who watches the watchers? It's us. And this is one of the key things because rather than being a disempowered populace, we will be more empowered because we're going to be more engaged. In aggregate, we're going to have a lot more free time to vote, to for activism and all those other things. And when I say activism, I don't mean like, going and holding a placard on the street sign. There's other
Yeah.
forms of activism to help make things better and make change, make positive change, and to work through those civic issues. And so this is why, I think it's safe to call it kind of a civic renaissance that we could expect, is because it's not just going to be the wealthy landowning men participating. It's going to be every single adult. And, yes, you might say, well, not every single adult is mentally qualified because they don't have the right education or experience to participate. But guess what? With all that free time, they're going to be learning. And the democratic processes are messy and noisy, and they always have been. But as you get more and more people with that time and energy to commit to education and sponsorship and all the other forms of civic engagement, activism, that will have, I believe, a very strong net positive effect on the strength of democracy, which of course then raises the level for everyone.
Yeah.
That's
And I
my
think,
very optimistic take.
yeah, but so, and I think that's the way that I would also sort of anchor that is in preservation of capitalism as still um, foundational principle, but refactored
Hmm.
to meet that new reality. And why I mention capitalism because your model, the post-labor economic model we're discussing, actually continues to assume and imply continuation of the concept of private ownership. So we are not talking about communism here. We are talking about a society that ensures everybody's basic needs are met through some pre and post distribution of common wealth that you're going to get as an entitlement for having the privilege of being born.
Right.
But then on top of that, the rest of your needs are met through some forms of ownership of shared land, shared resources. And therefore, you are now an involved citizen. You are now an empowered citizen that has agency because you are an owner of the land that you live in, the country that you own. So you are actually more, I think, vested
Yep.
as the owner to ensure that things go well, that you are going to
Yeah.
leave better society for your children and so on and so forth. So the effect should be incentivizing the sense of pride in ownership of the part of the future society, as opposed to feeling disengaged and powered because you are on government paycheck.
Right.
That's a, I think, really important thing to call out. We are not
Yeah.
pitching communism here. We are pitching capitalism refactored.
Yes. Yeah, no, that is a very critical distinction. I was first turned on to this idea. I don't remember who said it first, but it's kind of become like an in vogue meme or reference. Is that if post labor by default is hypercapitalism, and so it's capital becomes the only thing that matters, and capital is wealth and property. So then it's like, well, then your labor is then going to be more providing meaning for other people, civic engagement, and responsible stewardship. It's those are the three pillars of participation and engagement in this future, which I think that's a really great view to see is stewardship, engagement, and providing meaning.
Correct.
That's what you're going to be contributing to society, and that's going to be your entitlement to participate and have economic agency in this future.
So then the logical implication, if we could have put ourselves into that reality,
Hmm.
we're really this is also a cultural transformation, because I think that I expect that different symbols of status will be emerging, right?
Oh yeah.
So maybe we can spend a minute or two on talking about the status and what status currently implies and how that might change going forward, David.
Right. So status is one of the most universally true things that all humans want, and there's different ways of playing these status games. So there's a book by Will Storr called The Status Game, which really does a great job of unpacking this. And he characterizes it as there's kind of three status games. There's success, there's prestige, and then there's dominance. And all other status games fit into one of those three. So success are the obvious symbols of success. How big your house is, how fancy your car is, those sorts of things. How you dress. Now, of course, that varies from culture to culture. There's different kinds of success status symbols. There's also prestige status symbols. So prestige is more about, I'm a chess grand champion. You're not going to make money from that, but you're saying, look how smart I am. I'm a chess grandmaster. Or it might be, I'm really important for my church. If there's spirituality is another path to prestige. For many people online, it's how many followers you have.
Yeah.
If I have 1 million followers on Instagram, cool, that's a form of prestige. It does also translate to success because you can monetize that, but many people don't. So those are examples of prestige games. And then there's dominance, which is about body and it's about intimidation and it's about sex appeal and those sorts of things. One of the ways that people employ dominance as a status game is they join the police or they join the military or they go train in martial arts or that sort of thing. So my thought is again, these are fundamental human drives. Status exists in all cultures, even in cultures that didn't have money. Status exists. So there's always a status economy as well. So one of the things that we're going to see is, some people are going to go to the gym more, right? There's already an entire status culture around fitness. There's also status cultures around like, how famous you are on the internet. Those aren't going to change. But what I do think is that as people, disconnect from work and hopefully spend less time on the internet and more time in the real world, they're going to find local status games, within their town, within their city, within their meetup groups, and in their hobbies. Here's an example. I knew a guy many years ago at the beginning of my career. His primary hobby was buying old Mustangs and restoring them. Well, guess what? Plenty of people do that, and what you do is you take your shiny new Mustang and you take it to a meetup, and everyone compares who's got the best, fanciest, most well-restored Mustang. That's a status game, and it's not harmful. One thing is that many people think that status games are intrinsically harmful, that there's winners and losers, but it's not. It's not automatically a winner takes all or a zero sum. It can be highly generative. Here's an example where it can be highly generative. You go to church, and what do churches do? Many churches have charitable wings where they do community service, and so that your social monkey brain is saying, "Hey, I want to be high status, so I'm gonna go contribute with this with this mission to go feed the poor or feed the homeless." Guess what? that gives you status within your group, and it also feeds people, or clean up rivers and clean up roadways, whatever it happens that you do. So status competition is actually, evolutionarily speaking, a very pro-social impulse. It can be destructive. I'm not going to, paint a rosy picture on it. Some people take it to dark places where if I win, someone else must lose. And there are some cultures that have a very zero-sum mentality. But overall, the net effect is that as people find new ways of engaging with status, they're going to find new ways of contributing. Because we as a collective tend to say, hey, you're adding value, so therefore you're higher status. Status is a proxy for social capital.
And what we can certainly project that in the post-labor world, the status that many people today draw through their jobs will be replaced, right, by status they will draw from other more meaningful and impactful things you just described, and those status opportunities will continue to exist at every level, from
Oh yeah.
global status to like family impact.
And it will
If
still feel like work.
yes,
This is the thing is labor is effort that you get paid for. Status work is effort that you use to accrue more social capital. Both are work, and finding meaningful work, and you say, hey, like let's just say, for instance, in my small town, there's a lot of civic engagement, so I could volunteer with the town. There's river cleanups and those sorts of things. And having those in-person relationships, I have a big sense of status because my wife and I are regulars at our dog park, and that's a small community, and we have like potlucks and all of our dogs play together and that sort of thing. And if there's a jerk at the dog park, I will stand up to them and say, hey, like you need to be less of a jerk, right? So those are examples of micro levels of status, but that is the natural, that is the organic kind of status, which is those in-person interactions where, like when I'm referring to a real thing that happened. I stood up to a jerk at the dog park, and after he left, all the other regulars have said, you did a good thing. You stood up for someone who was being mean. Thank you for doing that. And so I didn't do it consciously to say, I'm going to boost my status,
yeah, of
but it's just,
course.
I did it because it was the right thing and it had a pro-social impact. And I think that as people disconnect from work, they're going to find, oh yeah, working towards accumulating social capital is still very meaningful, especially if you do it with pro-social ways of expressing that impulse.
This was actually fantastic, and I think a wonderful way to wrap up this conversation, David. Uh, that life after labor isn't really the end of work, as you just described. It's the beginning of human civilization's next operating system, really.
Yep.
And that's the one that's going to be optimized not for survival, but for significance. And I think that the good news is that we can see the path to it, but that requires a change in mindset. The change in mindset from the mindset of scarcity, which has defined our history and an economy, into a new changed mindset of abundance. And I think if we put that as a shining north star for humanity, mobilize and organize ourselves, I believe that's achievable, that's within reach, and that should be what unifies us across political spectrums, across social spectrums, across nations, because this will actually be the right path forward for all of us, for all of humanity. David, you have done magnificent work in writing the great decoupling. Congratulations and thank you. I
Thank
very
you.
much look forward to the publication, which I understand is getting nearer. And
Slowly. Yes.
yes, and of course, I very much look forward to staying connected with you, and as we continue to sort of think about this and engage the public and move this framework forward. I'll give you maybe your last comments before we wrap it up, David.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I understand that there's a tremendous amount of skepticism out there. Uh, Grand pronouncements and large predictions about the future are always met with skepticism. What I will also say is that in many cases in the past, it's one thing to predict something about something that doesn't exist, right? If you say, ah, well, this technology will exist in the future, the technology exists today. And all the technologies that are driving this trend that leads me to this conclusion of post-labor economics are following the trend that you would expect. They are general purpose technologies, which means they're rapidly improving, they are causing secondary innovations, and they're pervasive. They're everywhere. Artificial intelligence already embedded everywhere. Humanoid robots will be everywhere that humans are within a few years. So, while it's not there yet, the trend already exists. And that is the key thing to pay attention to. So, everything that I predict is not necessarily guaranteed. And certainly the optimistic path that I outline is not guaranteed. Hence why I feel like the book needs to be written and these conversations need to happen because that coordination is how we can say, ah, yes, you've laid out something that seems reasonable. Let's see if we can get there. So, thanks for being with us along the path, and there is a tremendous amount of work to do. So I'm glad that you've reached out to me, and let's keep it going.
Onwards and upwards. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon. Bye bye.